righty. Let's get down to business. Questions? I got answers. I got all the answers.
Ooh, sounds like the Bible to me.
Every answer that's ever existed, I got them.
Not that I believe that the Bible has all the answers. But anyway, sorry.
Anyhow, anybody have any questions? Feel free to ask.
Yes. Let me see, because I've got some questions that I've written down. I need to browse through them.
Anyone else while you're waiting?
I do actually, if it's okay.
Yeah, do it.
Well, for those of us that you want to use color for our homework assignment, do you have any examples or tips or demos you could maybe share with us real quick?
Sure. In fact, I was talking about, I think earlier too, about showing a process of rendering. So let's talk about both. Let's do both.
Cool.
So for me, it's really simple. I always focus on values. So what that means is that if I am painting, let's say some sort of shape like this, and then it's doing this, and then it's doing, let's say that, and then maybe there's some sort of shape on there, you know, say like that, like that kind of pattern, and then I put, shadow on it for whatever reason, right? So I try to then stay forever in tune with this idea right here. You see this?
You mean you try to stay true to those values?
Yeah, that is exactly what I mean. So let's say I introduce another series of values, like darker values. Okay. And then I want to, I don't know, like bring this value over here for whatever reason. All right. And I want to put that in shadow for whatever reason. I already have a shadow value that's over here. And if I have a light, little trim, I have a shadow value. You see that?
Okay, yeah.
And so always staying true to that is kind of what makes me maintain my values. Okay, so now let's talk about color. There's all sorts of ways to handle color. But ultimately, when it comes to color, I don't really mind starting in color by continuously thinking values. So this is already in the darker value range. So picking something a little bit, for one, warmer was my natural instinct, but also lighter. It's going to be a good move to stand out. That's a good value, and that's a good color. But you'll see that nothing changes except for one thing. Now I'm just using colors. So I'm thinking of local value, whatever that may be. Actually, let's not get too crazy with the colors. So if I have something like this, something like that, and then let's say I introduce a shadow value of some sort, then I just try to stick to those shadow values religiously, but now with color. Okay. It's the same ideal. And what's cool is because you can change the color at any time, as long as your values are pretty strong. That's one way of thinking about it. There's another way to think about it is to break your values apart, because there's really local values. Here, let's go back to a brush that I can maintain for a bit. Local values, and then there's like the lighting values, okay? So local, lighting, okay? Local values is the kind of stuff that you guys have been doing a lot of, where you would have a design here, like a shape, whatever this looks like. And then you would, maintain local values, local colors, whatever. You guys get the point, right? Stick to values though, actually. So we don't, whoops. You know? So we have this local value, and then we think about lighting after the fact. Okay? And then we have lighting. Right. Okay, lighting. Where we think about how the light and shadow shapes are affecting the objects that we see. Okay? This is ignoring any of the local values. This is almost entirely just light and shadow. You know?
Yeah. You're just going for shadow spots and trying to.
Yeah, and what's cool is this with this is you can change the intensity of it. I didn't really match up the painting, but you get the point, you know? And then combining the two is really the trick, you know? But what's cool is that, like, if you understand each and every one of these processes, the local or the lighting, you can pick whatever one you start with. I typically start with local value only. You usually just focus on that. So let's do this. So I go in here. And I just find local values. But what's cool is that it looks like I'm doing more than that. But not really. I'm just trying to find what looks good graphically. And then from here, once I start to get a sense of the graphic read, then I'll start to introduce some of the more helpful secondary read.
It's funny how much I hesitate when I'm trying to paint the other values. I usually go for a softer brush, and I avoid stains, so to speak, like that. Like on the face, for example, you're just going for it, with dark marks. And
Yeah, it's because the difference is because I'm trying to actually finish a painting, and
yeah.
and putting a lot of guesswork. What that will do is give you work to finish, clean up later.
Hmm.
So it's better to just try, get it wrong, learn from that mistake, don't do it next time. And the best way to do that is to actually make the mistakes, and then recognize why you made those mistakes. I think whenever people are just kind of going around the edges, they're making way more mistakes than they need to be.
Yeah. I definitely need to learn how to work more efficiently because for that lady, well, that lady especially, I think I started her about yesterday afternoon,
Uh-huh.
and I finished her probably this morning, I guess. Which to me is too long. I think it makes me feel impatient. Well, I'm actually a very anxious person, so
You're very what? Anxious?
anxious.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I feel
So
like time flies by faster and faster.
yeah. So the point to kind of get from what you're seeing me do here is that I'm just putting it in. I'm just putting those marks in. And just to be clear, something like this used to take me weeks to finish, like a character design. But then I could probably do it in easily in half, not half the time, in like half a day.
Hmm. So back when did it take you that long, like weeks, to finish this?
Like right in the beginning when I started really trying to get good at art. So nearly like 7 or 8 years ago is when I really started to kind of get my sea legs started going much faster.
Uh-huh.
So, once I get that graphic read though, that's by far the most important thing because everything else is just will fall in line.
Right.
And then when I want to make changes, I have already began studying a rule set for what my values will be on objects in this character design, so I can make changes like constantly.
Yes.
My son's playing Among Us right now. You can hear him doing tasks, being a good crew member.
So these marks you're laying in right now, are you laying in different local value, or are you?
Yeah, it's now I'm in like a land of both. I'm doing both lighting and local value. But like I said, I started though with local value. But once I get that initial confidence of like, yeah, this is looking fine, then I know where I can put light values and when I know to put shadow values because I've already set a lot of those things in place, you know? So it's like a good way of thinking about this potentially is like I've created my palette already, but it's like within my actual painting, you know? See, in traditional paint, you couldn't get away with that. Like figure out the palette as you're painting, but we're digital, so totally get away with a lot more.
And do you also paint traditionally?
No, only when I was in school.
Right.
But I am definitely far more effective in digital than I am in traditional painting specifically. traditional mediums that I prefer are like marker because they act the way that I prefer. Just gets to the point
Uh-huh.
and they're less messy.
I was listening very closely to the first Q&A with the I forget his name. I forget who it was. The first student, anyway, because he asked you a question that I was going to ask you to. Well, he said things that I was about to say too, and I think it had to do with the gap between his use to using traditional equipment, material, meaning pencil and paper and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because I much more used to drawing with traditional material to pencil and paper,
Yeah.
and I can draw way faster than with the digital mean. And sometimes, just like him, I feel like I'm lagging behind, and I'm like, man, why is it so slow? And I know it's just that I'm not used, or I haven't practiced enough in the right way with the digital material. Well,
Mm-hmm. Oh, I thought you were gonna ask me a question. Or you were just making a point.
Yeah, I was just making a point. Yes.
Yeah, you sound just as tired as I do, dude. Everyone in this class is like so tired. But you have a good reason. I just had like a long day.
It's 6 in the morning now. Yeah, well, almost 6 in the morning.
Time to wake up. Yeah, so yeah, I think people get way too confused with like different tools, and then they start to think that there's something wrong with them because they can do it in other places. But the thing is that I even would question that, because even though I don't paint traditionally a lot, it wouldn't be that much of a challenge to transition because really it's just a tool still. It'll take me like maybe a month to really get used to it. But then once I do, I'll be back in business.
Yeah.
Because all my skills not in my tools, it's in my head.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say I like this design. This is just a quick demonstration so I can get to color. So now let's say we have something worth coloring. Okay. So what I would do is I would actually normalize the colors, or sorry, the values a bit. Normalizing as in like I'll make the lights and darks get closer together.
Like lowering the contrast?
Like lowering the contrast. So that way we can get some of the lights and darks back. But I was coming from a extreme base. If I was just going to do black and white, if I just wanted to show this as a black and white design, I would just leave it as is. But if I want to show it as a color design, I'm just going to normalize it just a little bit, just to see if I can get more out of the colors, because I might very well go back to this, depending on how it goes, right? Because colors will make me feel differently once I see them. So when I'll make a color layer, and then I'll begin. Okay. And because I know that blues, reds, greens, like very saturated colors like this, do really well in mid-tone values. So I'm going straight to the most mid-tone value I see. Okay. And then I know that like peaches and pinks do well in the lighter values. I'm going to do that in this skin. Right. It was premeditated. And I'm not going to keep it, especially with skin, I'm not going to keep it just that one tone. I'm going to actually sprinkle in oranges to create some hot spots for like blood. And then I'm going to go straight to red and glaze it on there. Just glaze it. And then I'll do desaturation around the muzzle. And that's just to get us a base. And then we can get brown for the hair, maybe. For this lighter value, we can go yellow. And then for this chest plate, we can keep it neutral. So we'll just go with like a kind of like a dull brown on everything else. It's like a lunch lady. And you'll notice that, it looks all right. And one thing we can do is we could still change the colors at any moment. Now, obviously, his skin's starting to get all weird. But if we're doing some stuff for like Guardians of the Galaxy, this might be all right, But it goes to show that some of those worked fine even when his skin was a different color. That it's all about them values. Get those values in lockstep. And then once I get this stuff in here, then I can kind of, again, decide. I can decide on stuff like how would it look on the more contrasty. You can see there, still works. It's just way more contrasted, right? It feels like an overblown photo, right?
I see.
Here it feels a little bit more natural, but I still have that original layer, so I can kind of meet in the middle. Because like I said, once I see the color, I'll feel differently about it.
Right.
And then let's say this is where I want to be, then I'll flatten it all, or use a adjustment layer above maybe, and color balance, so that way even the grays aren't gray anymore. They have some color to them. And then you can even do curves. Curves is more curves as it implies. You can use curves to decide the fate of your painting. I'm adjusting both the RGB at that point. Yep, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. And then I begin to actually try to do good work here. Try to do the Lord's work. And now I actually will paint in colors. Like I'll go in here and saturate a little bit more in some areas.
It's really interesting because it's obviously loose, but it still has that confidence, that look of confidence that you were talking about before. And it's kind of hard to understand how you do that.
Oh, it's not hard to understand. It's hard to do.
There you go.
Like, let's put it into a different let's put it into a different context. Would you, if you saw somebody like a master sprinter like Usain Bolt run as fast as he does, and be like, it's hard to understand why he runs so fast?
I understand it, I just can't do it.
Yeah. Right. And in the same example of the Usain Bolt, it's the same idea. Like, you can't, but it doesn't mean you can't train to run fast, right? You can totally do that. In fact, you may never be as fast as him, right? But if you trained as hard as he did, practice as often as he did, you most certainly probably go to the Olympics,
Yeah.
And even if you placed 500th in the total ranking of the world, right? That just means there's only 499 people faster than you, and out of the 7 to 8 billion people on this earth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you always have to think of it like that. So now let's think about what I just said about like how does that relate to painting? So the confidence is like, I just have done this so many times, you know, that I just know what I'm doing. Right. And you are still in the beginning stages of that. That's all. Right. In fact, you were quite literally just told that this is something you should be more effectively doing. Right. And so it's even fresher on your mind. Right. Where before you were not even thinking about it at all. You know, you were just trying to make good art. But hopefully this gives you guys a clue on how I would approach color. Right? I'm just really convinced that color is kind of a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean like in a bad way where it's like color's not important at all. I'm just saying, like, I think people put too much emphasis on colors. And if you just put a little bit of color in there, people get really excited. But here's the thing, I think that the color is not doing the most of the work. I think values is like, it's getting a bad rap.
Now,
Like Steve Jobs versus Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak was like the guy who like made the first personal computers, right? Steve Jobs was just like the marketer, you know. Not to say that there's no, and I like to use that example actually too. Now that I think about it, because it's not to say that Steve Jobs had no importance of any kind, right? Just that without Steve Wozniak, they wouldn't have had Apple, right?
Yeah.
And you can look at it in reverse. If Pixar didn't have Steve Jobs, Pixar probably wouldn't be around. You know?
That's sure.
And so it's like, to me, it's like, what is the core though? What actually makes the thing? And so the Steve Wozniak example is like, Steve Wozniak was the rock star engineer, not Steve Jobs.
Mm.
And so for me, the rock star engineer in this scenario is the values.
Now, since you're talking about practice and how to work efficiently, would you share with us how your practice routine was like when you started? Because
Sure.
for most of us, well, like for myself anyway, I haven't, gone to art school or anything like that, so I don't know what the program would be like, what you would have to learn, and what your teachers asked you to do, like your practice routine was like when you were a student. So I have no idea what that is like since I haven't done it, So
Sure.
I've been practicing anatomy. I've been, studying values by trying to replicate pictures and trying to guess what value is what, is where, etc. I've been, using references to see what how other artists have, developed their art, like what you've suggested in some of your videos on how to study and how to practice. But if you could just share with us how you used to practice when you were starting out.
Mm-hmm. So the way that I practice is I just practiced a lot.
Mm.
And there's this meme that goes around that's really hilarious. It's like famous artists asked, like, what should I, like a beginner artist asked a famous artist, like, how can I get better? And then the famous artist says, practice. And then just walks away, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a funny meme because it's like what I always say. And I think a lot of other big artists say the same thing too. And it's really, really funny because it's like there's two sides of this argument, which is, yeah, why aren't they telling us the secrets, y'all? All right.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they keep dodging the question? And then on the other side is like, No, but it's true. People should be practicing, right? So there's a lot
yeah.
of people on that camp. But here's the thing: when you start to hang out with artists that are of a higher caliber, um, you just realize everyone's on the same joke, right? That it is just straight up practice, man. There's nothing to it. And don't worry, I'm gonna give you some more specifics. Don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to be sure, because once you hear it, you might not be satisfied.
Uh-huh.
Right. So the point I'm making is like, when people were sharing that meme, and those, like, I even saw some YouTube videos that were like making the claim, like, just saying practice is terrible advice. Right. And I actually understand that sentiment. I actually I agree with it at some fundamental level. But as we talked about before, remember, it's a mentality problem that I think is usually what drives bad practicing. Okay. Of like expecting a new result, even though you're not actually trying something different. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, many of the students in the class have been saying stuff like, I've been struggling. Oh, it's a challenge. It's been hard, and I have been applauding this, including yourself. You've been saying this as well, right?
Yes.
That is what practice looks like. That is it. You're doing it. So now when you ask me, what is my regimen? Here's the problem with the question, is that even if I tell you my regimen, it doesn't matter, because you are at a different place and state of mind. You're a different individual than me. But the
Mm-hmm.
great equalizer is that we both needed to practice. That's it. Okay. I am dark. I have a darker complexion in my skin. I need more vitamin D than people who do not. This is just how I'm built. I got a 6'4" wingspan. I'm 5'9". Okay, I got long ass arms, and I'm not that tall, so I can deadlift really easily. Long arms are already touching the ground, so barely standing up.
Mm-hmm.
So if I told you, hey, I just do this kind of deadlift, that's how I train. But you have shorter arms, and you're 6'2" with the wingspan of 6'2" person, which is an average. You should have the wingspan of your height. And I showed you how I deadlifted, and I gave you my regimen. You may very well find out that it does not work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Now what? What ends up happening? You see kind of how the next scenario can actually lead you to a problematic, even more worse scenario, where you'll start taking it personal again. It's like, I tried the thing and it didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's a better way to think about asking questions. The questions should be very specific. Whenever, and I'm going to give you some specifics now. Like I said, I'm not going to just leave you high and dry. I'm just trying to really primer you, okay?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
But you should have very specific questions, because those specific questions are relating to you, not to me, not to anyone else that you've seen online, not to whatever you saw, not from what you've heard, right?
Uh-huh.
To you, to what you like, what you found was challenging. This is why my class usually does well, because as you see, I'm giving everyone generally advice that makes sense for them for what they need to hear. Even the way I'm answering this question is for you, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone's different. Everyone's at different paces. This is why, linear education doesn't work so well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you fall out of line for just 1 year, you're kind of stuck behind forever. It's really hard to get back, versus, oh, this person's falling behind. Let's all slow down for this person for a second to help them out. I don't mean like the whole class, but the teacher goes and meets them where they're at,
Sure.
So with that being said, when I was training, I just did whatever the hell. I had no agenda. And this is why I said you might be disappointed. It wasn't like I was like, this is how you should definitely practice. I cracked the code. And I feel like most, if not all, expert artists that tell you that they may have figured it out may not know because, and when they say, yeah, you should practice, because they kind of know, like they don't remember what it was that made them better. Like in the way that people would like to know. Like I studied anatomy, but anatomy didn't help me with my design. And I studied design, but design didn't help me with my painting. I studied painting, but painting didn't help me with my anatomy. You see what I'm saying? Like I just kind of did whatever I wasn't good at. And I just had a singular focus. So
your answer is actually not disappointing me. Quite to the contrary, I find it very relieving, actually.
All right.
Because I thought,
well,
I used to think,
generally speaking,
sorry.
Yeah, it's like generally speaking, the disappointment is more of like it's a red herring. I'm just saying disappointment in terms of there is no secret, right? Like to think that we all have it together. Like I'm really good, I get it. So it makes sense that it seems like I would have it together, but I don't, and or I didn't at least. But now, with experience, I have a regiment, I have a strategy of how to get better. But the problem is, I'm at a different skill level than when I was trying to get good, right?
Yeah.
And going back to the Usain Bolt example, it'll be like if you never ran before, I'm asking you to train by running 25 miles because that's how I train: 10 miles in the morning, 15 miles at night. That'll be crazy. But I'm an elite athlete. I need to do that. And I can do that because I have done a lot of different things and found out what works for me now. And that's why I say I think it's a little bit of a lie for people who may say, yeah, a beginner should just totally practice like this and they'll get good. This is why you have constantly a bunch of insecure beginners because they just feel like they're not doing it right? Because their instructor is saying, no, this is how I did it. But I don't think the instructor actually knew either. You know?
Well, I wouldn't expect you to tell us, that we should practice the way you do now because that's just not possible. That's why I was more pointing towards the beginning of your career when you were lost to, like you had specific guidance when you were at school that might have helped you. Well, at least I hope it helped you. Finding a way.
No, that's what I'm saying. I didn't. I dropped out of school because my school wasn't helping me. My point is, I'm giving you the answer.
Yeah.
Right? It's practice.
Sure.
It's the great equalizer. And then I tell people also it's the mentality of it too. It's the thinking of behind the practice that matters. See? And once you start to get in line with this, you'll eventually will be in on the joke and I'll welcome you into the club. And then you'll start telling other young artists you got to practice now. You got to put the time in. Now, here's a really good way of thinking about this too that I came up with that I think really helps illuminate the way I see it from my perspective. Okay. So imagine that you and me are hanging out and we see all these different doors. Okay. And here's your goal right here to go to there. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's me. I'm wearing a hat. Here's you. You're super metal. You're throwing the horns. Okay. So you're like, AJ, like, what was the first door that you walked through, AJ? That's kind of what I'm hearing, right? And after that was a series of doors that I walked through. And I'm saying, just walk through the door. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, sure. So then you walk through the door and it does this. And you like, right when you get here, you're just like, this just feels like I'm not going in the right direction. And I said, just keep going. And you're like, all right. You go and it leads you back over here. Okay? But you also noticed on the way, there's other doors. Right? And now you're back in this room. You're like, oh my God, AJ, like it led me back to this other door. I was like, no, don't worry about it. Just go through that door again or go through any new doors. Just go through the door. And okay. I'm going to try a different door this time. I'm going to go this one. and you're going like this. You realize it connects here, and you're like, oh, what? You know? And again, you saw other doors as you did that. I'm telling you the same thing. Just keep going. You're going, you're finding more doors. You're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing this, you're doing this, right? And then you stop asking me about doors because for once, you're actually starting to see a bigger picture, right? And now you're off to the races. You're journeying down this thing. But then, you come to a crossroad. And you say, hey, AJ, like, there's this crossroad that I came with, left or right? I was like, oh, okay, well, let me ask you a few questions. Do you want to do that? You want to, and you answer those questions like, oh, yeah, then go left. That could be like what we did with Gingling, where she showed me stylized work. It's not a matter of competence. She's a really competent artist. It's a matter of preference. This is more personal. I have to talk to her, right?
Yeah.
She could have easily went to the right direction, not to the left. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
But look what happens. What do you see? What do you see in front of you?
A mess, a way, lots of different ways, and lots of practice, lots of trials and errors, and just experience.
It's like you've created a map, right? Yeah. It's like this whole map. And see how you went from something like this, where you had no road traveled at all, right?
Yeah.
To a complete map. This is all experience. Even though some of them look like they went backwards, you have a bigger picture. You're like creating Google Maps. You know what I mean? You're to go left here when it's time.
Yeah.
You know when to go right. Yeah. You know when to go straight because you know where it leads. You're more competent. And then you start seeing, once you start to get to God tier artist, okay, you start getting super meta. You start realizing there's multiverses. And they're like all, and you're on like, you're actually in a marble. Yeah. do you see the point? So when I say practice, it's like, this is what it metaphorically feels and looks to me. It's that you're traveling all these different routes. You're gaining experience. You understand that time you made those mistakes with proportions and the body types, you learned valuable lessons.
Yes.
That is something that didn't take away from your skill. Even though it hurt, even though it felt like you made worse art, it felt like you were going backwards. You weren't. You just now have more road that you've traveled.
So I'm sorry to say your answer was by no means disappointing, man. I'm sorry to disappoint you by saying that your answer was not disappointing. No,
the specific idea of like, hey, you got to practice because it's or like I didn't really have an idea. I'm saying that this part shouldn't, because this should be clarifying why those types of questions, those really broad strokes questions, tend to lead to broad stroke answers. And I'm saying, if you want broad stroke answers, practice. Yeah. That is the number one piece of advice you should only care about. Okay? Good. All right. Now, I'm going to give you some practical advice alongside. Hold on. My daughter just came in. Stop. All right. Sorry. So I'm going to give you some practical advice attached to that.
Give me the fish now, yeah?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the fish now. Yeah. So I like to do something. I think that this is the most helpful advice for a starting person to attach to the whole practice mantra, okay? Which is practice what you're not good at, okay? Yeah. That's as simple as I can get it, but here's an example. So let's say you're having a hard time with rendering. Then stop, pull all the stops. Like if you're learning anatomy or whatever, stop for a second, start learning how to do some rendering. Okay? And once you get a handle of that, not all of it, but just a handle, like you learned a thing, then you might start recognizing, hey, my anatomy is kind of trash. Then go back to anatomy. Hey, you know, my
All right.
designs are kind of garbage. Go back to design. Remember how I said that I didn't really like, just because I studied one thing didn't mean the other things would start to fall in line. And
Hmm.
there's this idea of like, you should just practice all of these things at the same time. No, just be very specific, like focus on one thing at a time. Snipe it.
Right.
Okay. And I
I
think,
find it relatively easy to learn or to study anatomy and um, rendering because these things are easier to
sure.
find material about, on the
Yeah.
internet.
In terms of accessibility, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So then if you're like, well, design isn't so easy, well, then that's your job to be an archaeologist then, right? Look for that information. Start observing it everywhere in all places,
Sure.
Otherwise, yeah, you're gonna just be trapped
Uh-huh.
wondering where all that information's at, but it's not anywhere. Like think like a scientist. Like a scientist wouldn't just be like, man, those big or those nice little dots in the sky are cool. It's like the scene from Lion King, the animated one,
Mm.
where like uh, when I think they were talking about the stars, and Pumbaa was like, I think that there's a series of giant gas. Like I forget exactly what he said, but he described them
Yes,
exactly to what they were.
precisely, but without even knowing it.
Yeah, and they're like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And it's like, it does kind of sound stupid, but that's like a great piece of evidence against our own intuitions. Could
Uh-huh.
could lead us astray.
Right.
Anyway,
But yeah, great piece of advice, and I wouldn't expect anything other than that.
I appreciate you appreciating it. Any other questions?
Mm.
Also, Billy, is this helpful, this painting demo? Because I know you were asking specifically about colors.
This
I
is
did.
super helpful. I'm actually following along with my own painting.
You're just like, copy it. I drop his own painting.
Hmm.
Yeah, man. Any other questions from any other of the students? Give someone else a chance. We'll take maybe two more at the most.
I
If
kind of have
nobody
a
else does,
question.
oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I have a kind of question. Do you need to be in California to get these kind of jobs? Because I know with the pandemic, things could definitely change, but I really don't want to move out there right now, especially with all like the
Hey,
wildfires.
how dare you?
Hey, you guys are constantly burning, and that's all I see.
How dare you? As you look behind me, my house is on fire. I'm like, it's not burning. What are you talking about? It is burning, but not in all of California. It's definitely not like it's not happening. For instance, I can see it from my house sometimes. Like when it was really bad, I was able to like the sky was like orange, bright orange, is crazy. And then for 2 days it was like raining ash. So it's definitely not like not in here. Okay. Um, but I will say this about the industry. Careful with the door, sir. Yes, they're recording. And so, can you guys hear my wife?
No.
No? Okay. Careful. They can see you. You can't crawl either. You're going to break the door. Oh my God. My wife's trying to get in. Why are you covering yourself? Oh my God, you goofball. Here, I'll zoom in on my own. I'll zoom in on my pores. Get right in there. Get right into my.
Oh man, what a sight!
Oh, there you go. She's gone. Actually, I can just turn off my camera. It should be all right. I'm gonna turn it off right now. Um, but to answer your question directly, no, you can live wherever, man. And that's even before the pandemic, man. Seriously, I was working for remote for five years. You know, I live in California. I worked for Riot, but I never like went into their office. ever. You know, to do work. I mean, I went there for like the first few times, like interviews and talking about projects and stuff, but not after that, not really. You know,
Yeah.
and
So what if you're
I
starting out? Do you need to be there though? Because I don't really know how it works.
yeah. So that's a good point, and I think so. I think you would in some cases because people feel that like people want bodies there, but to then your point, the pandemic has changed people's perspective. You know. But let me just be clear. I think even still, I have friends and students who are not at like my level, for perhaps, right? And they were still again able to work remote. Like you gotta just realize that if you have a certain quality of work, that you just have a lot more access. That's it. People are a little bit more open, you know. But like you're right. Like the pandemic has only just opened the doors. You know what I mean? To the
Yeah.
idea of like, yeah, you don't really need people in here. I have a friend who was working at a studio, and when the pandemic hit, he was really upset about it. But then he was just like, you know what? F this place, dude. And he left California and went to Colorado, I believe, and living with his dad, I think, or his grandpa, I forget, and helping taking care of him.
Huh, that's
The camera
interesting.
is off. This camera is on, but the webcam footage stream is off. No way. I'm gonna totally turn it off now. Get out of here, woman. But yeah, and just to give you some even more perspective, I just landed an art directing job for this company in Colorado. So it's kind of like I don't really need to be there either. They're sending me my computer, my work
Ooh,
computer.
nice. You even get a computer with it.
Yeah, and I just think that that's just how it's going to be for a while. I think people are going to start to realize, oh yeah, we can do that. In fact, there's another problem that's happening where people are overworking, and it's they're more productive. This is why people are really loving the work from home, like executives. It's because people aren't leaving work, you know, because their work is home.
Oh,
Does it make
yeah, that's a
sense?
good point. Huh.
Yeah, like there's this idea of like, you are working, you're on the clock, and then once time hits, you just roll out of there, dude. Right? There's a lot of other things that contribute to this, like water cooler talk. Hey, Jim, what did you do this weekend? And you're like just talking. Like a lot of that stuff is just gone. So people just are nose deep into their work now. Does it make sense?
Yeah, seems kind of good and bad.
No, it's definitely bad, actually. It's good because it shows that people are productive, but it's bad that people are being overly productive. It's showing that people can do it. It's totally possible. But then because nobody is used to it, like culturally speaking, people are not able to handle it effectively. Make sense? And I think for a student, I think you wouldn't have to worry about it too much. I think you'd be all right.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. And then I think, Billy, you had a question, and then we'll call it a wrap.
Yeah, it's something that we talked about last week when you're talking about 3D and how it's changing.
It is.
What would you recommend for someone like me who wants to start getting into 3D? Which program do you think is not only accessible for someone like me, but also
Blender.
has the tools? Blender. All right, cool.
Game over, dude.
Cool.
Yeah, Blender still has its holes in some places. It's not like ultimately. There's like I just know of other tools that can just do certain things just way better. But even with that knowledge, even me knowing that, like I feel like if you didn't have any other access to any other tool, that you'd be fine. Because I've seen some really amazing stuff out of Blender, like completely made in Blender. Yeah. It's kind of hard for me to be like, no, you should totally use this for that and that and this. Like, I personally like the combination of 3D Coat and Blender. I like using both of these tools. So if you wanted to get a second tool, I would say 3D Coat.
I've messed around a little bit with Blender, so that's pretty encouraging to hear.
Yeah, Blender, I think, is really disrupting the industry. But that's the nature of things.
Well, it's good that it's free because I hate how Maya's like so expensive if you actually want to buy it.
Yeah, I am actually a big fan of subscription model. I think submodel is my favorite because even Blender is suspect that it's free. You know, especially if like for whatever reason it just shuts down. I don't think it will, but it is suspicious. I still don't know how they make their money. I never looked into it either. I probably should. But the point I'm trying to make here, though, is that, Blender, subscription model tools. What I love about the submodel is that it's affordable, right? Especially if they make it affordable. If they don't, then it's not so cool. But affordable submodels. But what's really cool is that if the developer is sub, then they can take that money and keep developing onto the tool, right? Keep making it better. Now, here's the thing. If you have submodel and you're not doing that, then there's really opportunity for criticism, And there are some tools, like including Maya, I think, where people feel like, I'm paying the sub, but I'm looking at Blender and they're getting all these amazing new features, like it seems like every freaking month. And I'm like not getting anything new,
Mm-hmm.
I can see that would be rough to swallow. Where I think Photoshop doesn't have that problem. People think it does, but like that's because they're looking for it to be a better painting tool. But Photoshop keeps making better photo manipulating, right? And they're going to be announcing some stuff even in Adobe Max, and it's going to be crazy, And so it's like, for me, Photoshop has not let me down, even though a lot of my peers hate it. And I remember one of my friends was like, I'm never going back to it ever again. They're just criminals. And I was like, oh, that's a little bit of a stretch, dude. And sure enough, he started coming back because he started seeing the overwhelming power of Photoshop. Photoshop is still a very powerful painting tool. It's just not made for painters. That's why I think it's like critiquing it's like critiquing a Lamborghini for not being a good school bus. It's like, it's not built to do that, dude. It has a different utility, right? But they recognize that. That's why they made Fresco. So, and my critiques of Fresco as a painting tool are legitimate. It's not nearly as good as Photoshop, even, and it's also not as good as the other mobile devices like Procreate and Infinite Painter for now, because they're on that submodel. So they'll be able to catch up eventually. And once they do, they'll be able to take the market because they're the only ones to sub. Right?
Yeah.
And they have a couple features that are already really nice, which is the cloud saving. So I can save to the Adobe Cloud, so I can open it in like I could save this to Adobe Cloud and then go to my iPod or my iPad and open it up in Fresco. The same painting, exactly as you see it, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to go to Dropbox and re-import it into new software. It just will be there. Same with brushes and libraries, all that kind of stuff. It's super cool. So that's only going to get better. So, Anyway,
Well, guys,
Hope
I have to go now. Sorry about this.
You go
Wish
too.
you all a very good weekend, and thank you, Anthony, for your advices again.
Yeah, we started the class a little later than I would like, so I will try to make it up to you guys at some other time. But till then, cheers. Everyone have a good night, and
Yeah.
I'll talk to you guys next week. Peace.
All right,
Sounds
man.
good.
See you. Goodbye, y'all.
Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it. Please subscribe to watch more in the future. If you liked the video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. If you like this content, you can go to my website, robotpencil.net, where you can find mentorships, tutorials, and a Patreon to get more exclusive content. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in my next videos.